In a world full of memorials to battles won, there are also monuments to loves lost. Arguably, the most famous on the love side of the ledger is the Taj Mahal in India, a magnificent mausoleum built by an emperor for his favorite wife. But there is another tomb built by a husband for his wife that is revered by architects from around the world, but you don't have to leave the country to see it. In fact, you don't even have to leave the city.
This was on the National Register of Historic Places decades and decades before the cemetery was itself.
This impressive tomb in St. Louis's Bellefontaine Cemetery was commissioned in 1891 by a beer baron whose brand name is no longer familiar, but whose family name is still well known because of another famous structure he had built. The Wainwright Building in downtown St. Louis was commissioned in 1890 by Ellis Wainwright. But before it was finished, his wife Charlotte died suddenly at the age of 34. This limestone and marble tomb is how Ellis Wainwright chose to honor the memory of his great lost love.
I used to teach art history, and art historians consider it possibly the most beautiful piece of tomb architecture in the United States.
The Wainwright Mausoleum and the Wainwright Building have more in common than just the name. Both were designed by architect Louis Sullivan, considered the father of modernism, who also originated the maxim, form follows function.
He has beautiful ornamentation, but it's the purity of form. It's a perfect half sphere on top of a perfect cube. It's geometry, and it's very regular geometry. These aren't rectangles. These aren't oblongs, ellipses. It's things with equal dimensions.
And yet, for all of Sullivan's decorative detail, there is something missing on the Wainwright tomb: the Wainwright name.
It's the only mausoleum in the cemetery that does not have a name. And the reason is, Ellis Wainwright, when it came time for him to ask Louis Sullivan about a name, he was told a one-word answer, and that's no. It will not have a name on it because it would diminish the architectural style. You know, this will be known and recognized as the Wainwright Mausoleum because of the amazing architecture.
The Wainwright tomb is surrounded by other magnificent mausoleums. After all, it sits atop a hill in the area of Bellefontaine Cemetery known as Millionaire's Row.
Well, at the time it was the most prominent cemetery in St. Louis, and in my opinion it still is. You know?
Several of the most spectacular monuments belong to other beer brewing families, including the Lemps, who built this majestic mausoleum directly and deliberately across from the Wainwrights.
When they built their mausoleum, because they were business rivals, they were brewers of German beer, they built it across the street and made it taller to take away the Wainwrights' view of the river.
Architecture professors will bring students up here. Architects will fly in from out of town, from any part of the country, just to see the structure.
He did this for her.
The Wainwright tomb has become such a popular attraction for everyday visitors, Bellefontaine includes it in 2 different tours. And taking those tours is the only way visitors can get inside to see the marble and mosaic artistry that begins on the floor and travels all the way to the ceiling. Ellis Wainwright died 33 years after Charlotte, and he's buried here too. And between her death and his, he led a remarkable life, as recounted in Carol Faring Shepley's book about the famous and infamous residents of Bellefontaine, with Ellis Wainwright falling into the scalawag column for alleged misdeeds on a scale big enough to land him in the pages of another book, Lincoln Steffen's famous exposé, The Shame of the Cities.
He decided that he wanted the rights to the public transportation, the trolley line, and to get it, he signed a bribe for $135,000. Fortunately for him, when the indictments came down, he was traveling in Egypt. He came back to St. Louis when the chief witness died, and he said, it's great to be back in the best town in the United States. And then he immediately decamped for Park Avenue in New York.
No one is sure how much it cost to build the Wainwright Tomb, but it must have been a lot considering it took 2 years to construct and was designed by the most famous American architect of his time, whose draftsman would become one of the most famous architects of his time, Frank Lloyd Wright, who later claimed some of the Wainwright Tomb was his design. There are no direct descendants of the Wainwrights to watch over the tomb, but an endowment pays for Bellefontaine to take care of it. They recently gave it a good scrubbing. Samuel Wainwright, Ellis's father, who started the brewery that made his son rich enough to be buried in a mausoleum, is also buried at Bellefontaine, but in a more traditional family plot in a different part of the cemetery. Ellis and Charlotte were the only Wainwrights to make it up the hill to Millionaire's Row, where despite their short lives together, they are united in splendor for eternity.
The architecture is beyond St. Louis, and we are blessed to have this here. It's very unique, and it is a one of a kind.